In 1996, two researchers named Thomas Stanley and William Danko published a study that shocked America. They had spent years studying actual millionaires, not celebrities, not trust fund heirs, but the quiet self-made wealthy hiding in plain sight. And what they found broke almost every assumption people had about what rich people look like. Most of these millionaires didn't drive luxury cars. Many lived in the same modest house for decades. They shopped for deals. They avoided debt like it was contagious. Meanwhile, plenty of people driving brand new BMWs and living in oversized homes were, financially speaking, barely holding on. This gap between looking wealthy and being wealthy is one of the most persistent illusions in modern life. And in 2026, with inflation reshaping budgets, interest rates still elevated, and social media pushing lifestyle comparison into overdrive, that illusion is more expensive than ever. So today, we're going to walk through 12 things that genuinely wealthy people tend to avoid spending money on. Not because they're cheap, but because they understand something most people don't. That money spent avoiding discomfort or chasing image almost always costs more than it appears to. Let's start with the most visible symbol of wealth in modern culture. The car. A brand new car loses a significant chunk of its value the moment it leaves the dealership lot, and continues depreciating steeply through its first few years. This is not a secret. It's one of the most well-documented facts in personal finance. And yet, new car sales remain enormous, financed largely through loans that stretch 5, 6, even 7 years. Here's the psychological trap. Buying a new car feels like progress. It feels like a reward for hard work. But financially, you are paying a premium specifically for the feeling of newness, a feeling that fades within weeks. While the payment obligation remains for years, wealthy individuals, particularly those who built their wealth rather than inherited it, tend to buy reliable, slightly used vehicles and drive them until they're no longer economical to maintain. Warren Buffett, one of the most famous investors in history, was known for driving modest cars for years past when most people would have upgraded. The point was never about being unable to afford something newer. It was about refusing to pay for status that provides no lasting value. This leads naturally into a bigger idea: the difference between spending to impress others and spending to build a life. There's a phrase often used in financial psychology circles: buying things you don't need with money you don't have, to impress people who don't care. It sounds harsh, but it captures something real. Designer logos, luxury handbags purchased on credit, extravagant weddings funded by loans. These are often less about the item itself and more about signaling status to people who, in reality, are far too preoccupied with their own lives to notice for long. The wealthy tend to separate two things that most people accidentally merge: self-worth and net worth. When those two get tangled together, spending becomes emotional rather than strategic. You're no longer buying a product. You're buying reassurance. And reassurance, it turns out, is one of the most expensive things a person can purchase, because it never actually satisfies the underlying need. If there's one financial habit that separates the wealthy from everyone else more consistently than almost any other, it's this: they rarely carry credit card debt. Credit cards are useful tools when paid off monthly. But when a balance carries over, interest rates, often north of 20% annually, begin compounding against you instead of for you. This is the exact opposite of how wealthy people use money. They aim to have compound interest working in their favor through investments, not against them through revolving debt, making only the minimum payment on a credit card is one of the most quietly devastating financial decisions a person can make, because the psychological relief of handling it for now masks the mathematical reality of how long that debt will actually take to disappear, often years, sometimes decades. for what may have started as a single unnecessary purchase. Now let's shift into an area that's less obvious but equally important, where wealthy people invest. And just as critically, where they refuse to invest. High-fee, actively managed investment funds have long been a subject of skepticism among financially sophisticated investors. Decades of data compiled by researchers and firms like S&P Dow Jones Indices have consistently shown that the majority of actively managed funds fail to outperform simple low-cost index funds over long time horizons, especially once fees are factored in. Warren Buffett famously made a 10-year bet in 2007 against a group of hedge funds, wagering that a simple S&P 500 index fund would outperform actively managed alternatives after fees. He won convincingly. The lesson wasn't that active management never works, it's that paying premium fees for the possibility of beating the market is for most investors a poor trade of certainty for hope. This is why financially sophisticated people are often deeply allergic to unnecessary fees in investing, in banking, in insurance. Fees are a guaranteed cost. Returns are not. And guaranteed costs against uncertain benefits are exactly the kind of math the wealthy learn to avoid. Speaking of uncertain benefits, let's talk about lottery tickets and get-rich-quick schemes. Lotteries function, statistically, as a tax on hope. The odds of winning major jackpots are astronomically low, often worse than the odds of several unlikely life events combined. Yet lottery spending remains enormous globally, disproportionately drawn from lower and middle-income households. According to various government revenue reports over the years, wealthy individuals, particularly those who built wealth through business or investing, tend to have an intuitive, sometimes hard-earned understanding of probability and risk. They didn't get wealthy by hoping for a lucky break. They got wealthy through repeated, compounding decisions made over years. That mindset makes lottery tickets multi-level marketing opportunities, and speculative get-rich-quick schemes feel less like excitement and more like an obvious mathematical loss. Here's a subtler one. Many financially literate people avoid whole life insurance when they're young and healthy, opting instead for term life insurance. Whole life insurance bundles a death benefit with an investment component, and it typically carries dramatically higher premiums than term insurance, which simply covers a set period at a much lower cost. Financial advisors, including well-known figures like Suze Orman, have long pointed out that for most people, especially younger ones without complex estate needs, the extra cost of whole life insurance rarely justifies its modest investment returns compared to simply buying cheap term coverage and investing the difference elsewhere. The wealthy tend to unbundle their financial products. Insurance is for protecting against catastrophic risk. Investing is for growing wealth. Mixing the two often means paying more for both while doing neither exceptionally well. Let's move to what is, for most families, the single largest financial decision of their lives: the home. There's a well-known concept in personal finance circles often called being house poor, owning a home so large or expensive relative to income that nearly every other financial goal gets sacrificed to maintain it. Bigger homes mean bigger mortgages, bigger property taxes, bigger utility bills, bigger everything. Interestingly, many self-made millionaires studied by Stanley and Danko lived in homes well below what their income could technically afford. Not because they lacked ambition, but because they understood a simple truth. A house is a lifestyle expense, not usually an investment vehicle in the way people assume. The wealthy often prioritize keeping fixed costs low, which frees up capital to invest in assets that actually grow: businesses, stocks, and other income-producing investments, rather than tying up money in square footage they don't need. Now, something almost everyone can relate to: subscription creep, streaming platforms, Apps, subscription boxes, gym memberships that go unused. Individually, each one feels small. $10 here, $15 there. But subscription-based businesses are specifically designed around a psychological reality. Once you're signed up, cancellation requires friction. And most people avoid friction. Financially disciplined people tend to audit recurring expenses regularly, cutting anything that isn't providing consistent, tangible value. It's a small habit, but it reflects a bigger principle. Wealth isn't just built through big decisions. It's protected through consistent attention to small leaks. Here's a paradox worth sitting with. Sometimes, buying cheap is the most expensive thing you can do. This idea was captured memorably by novelist Terry Pratchett through what's now often called the Boots theory of economic injustice. The basic idea: a wealthy person buys durable boots that last years, while someone with less money buys cheap boots that fall apart repeatedly, ultimately spending more over time replacing them again and again. Wealthy individuals often apply this logic broadly, investing more upfront in quality tools, appliances, or clothing that lasts, rather than repeatedly replacing cheaper versions. This isn't about luxury for its own sake. It's about total cost of ownership over time, rather than the sticker price in the moment. Let's return briefly to investing, because there's one more habit worth highlighting: frequent trading. Studies on retail investor behavior, including well-documented research from finance professors like Brad Barber and Terence Odian, have repeatedly shown that investors who trade frequently, trying to time market movements, tend to underperform those who simply buy and hold diversified investments over long periods. The costs come from transaction fees, taxes on short-term gains, and, critically, the tendency to buy high out of excitement and sell low out of fear. The wealthy, particularly long-term investors, tend to embrace a kind of strategic boredom. They resist the urge to constantly react to market noise. Patience, unglamorous as it sounds, has historically been one of the most reliable wealth-building tools available. Finally, let's talk about something increasingly relevant in the social media era: spending money specifically to appear successful online. Elaborate vacations financed by credit, expensive dinners posted for engagement, luxury items purchased primarily for visibility rather than genuine enjoyment. There's a growing body of consumer psychology research suggesting that experiences and purchases driven by social comparison tend to produce shorter-lived satisfaction than those aligned with personal values or genuine interest. Genuinely wealthy individuals, especially those who've held wealth for a long time, often become notably indifferent to this kind of performance. Not because they don't enjoy nice things, many absolutely do, but because their spending tends to be driven by personal preference, rather than the need for external validation. That distinction, subtle as it sounds, may be one of the most financially protective mindsets a person can develop. If there's a single thread running through all 12 of these habits, it's this: wealthy people don't necessarily spend less. They spend differently. They ask a quiet, consistent question before almost every purchase. Is this building something, or is this just performing something? New cars, designer status symbols, lottery tickets, oversized homes, unnecessary fees, forgotten subscriptions. These aren't spending choices that make people poor overnight. They're small, repeated decisions that, compounded over years, quietly determine who builds lasting financial security and who stays trapped in the appearance of it. The good news is that none of these habits require extraordinary income to change. They require awareness and a willingness to separate what actually adds value to your life from what simply looks good to everyone else watching. If this kind of thinking resonated with you, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from.